Okay. Everybody's ready for lunch? No lunch. Not yet. Not yet. That was just the beginning. We have a panel coming forward, and I'm going to ask Fergus Kerr to continue with the introductions and the program going forward. Fergus.
Are we going to put the podium back up?
Would you like the podium?
These guys?
Okay.
Okay, we're just going to have to move along here now. So far this morning, folks, what is your first learning? Smile! Come on, smile! Second learning from Alistair, look in the eyes. And Alistair's message about leadership was spot on. For the last couple of years, I've been involved in new safety management programs, and it always bothers me when I go into an operation. They've got this fabulous critical risk management system, and there's no leaders left. Because they've got this fabulous program that doesn't require leadership. Well, that's bullshit. Because leadership is primary, leadership is absolutely vital. And that's the one learning you should have taken from Alistair. The other is innovation. Innovation is defined as change, improvement. And I would submit to you that we're here today as a mining industry because we improve, because we change, because we innovate. A lot of things we've done that don't hit the newspapers. In fact, a lot of commentators, a lot of critics of the mining industry, I would submit, wouldn't understand innovation if it slapped them right in the head. So today we have 4 what I would call innovators, people that have demonstrated the skill, their excellence in innovation. And these are the 4 gentlemen sitting, oh, sorry, there's a lady in there too. There's 4 people sitting up on the stage. I'm going to ask each one of them to give a short presentation, and then we'll open up to your questions and your discussions. Starting off with Don Duval. Don Duval is the Chief Executive Officer of NORCAT, basically an organization focused on skill development and leadership development, and it's also home to the Innovation Mill. Incredibly pertinent to what we're going to be discussing this morning. Don came to us in Sudbury he was the Vice President of Mars Discovery District in Toronto and has had a huge impact on NORCAT and on Sudbury since he's been here. So I'll ask Don to come up and give us a short presentation. Don?
Yeah, I'll tilt it up just a fair bit. There we go. Okay, I'll be brief because I really have to go to the bathroom. I'm just kidding. Okay, so what I'm going to do today is just give you a bit of an overview on some really interesting trends that we're seeing in the world related to health and safety, but underpinned by the human capital side of the equation, training and development. Obviously, it's paramount given the couple of the talks that we've heard already today that the human factor is critical. Tomorrow, for everyone, for your awareness, we're going to be doing a similar discussion, but more on the technologies specifically that are driving health and safety in the workplace. And what I'm hoping to do is to provoke some debate, obviously not during this session, maybe during the Q&A or over lunchtime here, by highlighting some of the trends that we're seeing, not only in mining, but other industries, again, as it relates to training and development and health and safety. It's a slide I presented about 2 years ago, and I've been adjusting as we go along. And I just want to highlight 3 interesting trends that we're starting to see in the world of mining, driven by data and insight that I and/or the NORCAT team get when we're speaking with customers around the world. The first thing relates to trends and innovation around integrated deep learning. And we're starting to see the notion of traditional training and development, which is still critical for a large segmentation of trainees entering the mining industry or existing workers looking to do skills upgrading. A lot of the classroom-based, experiential, hands-on mentorship programs are still critical. What we're starting to see bubble up, though, is this concept of AI and artificial intelligence and/or deep learning applicable to new workers and existing workers in the mining workforce. And a simple example of that is this notion of self-adjusting curriculum, whereby a traditional online program that you take, it's a standard modular format, you answer questions that are static, irrespective of who's taking the program. This notion of, as you're going through a program, if you get a certain question wrong, it routes you to different questions to reiterate certain points that you're not getting correct. And this linear waterfall now becomes a one-to-many waterfall. We see it in multiple other industries today, where based on your answer, it determines the next content curriculum that you will be presented. It happens in classroom-based environments, it happens in online environments. The mining industry is now starting to implore and starting to utilize many of these techniques. And to give you a kind of an interesting pedagogical example, there are many faculties and universities across Canada that now, after every single lecture, seek feedback through an app, through an online tool, as to the performance of the professor and what points that you did understand, which ones you did not understand, to enable that individual the next lecture to make incremental real-time improvements to the content to ensure that everyone is following along. That premise is actually starting to enter the mining industry, especially the self-adjusted curriculum for new workers. Something to consider. On the technology and mobility, it's interesting, the concept of this whole notion that Jody had mentioned around the new world of work having the new workers, rather, attention span of 9 seconds. Something that I think is critical for employers to understand is that is a trend at a macro level around the world. This notion of having long abilities to sit and listen and understand in a classroom, those days are migrating away, especially with the new generation of workers coming in. So what we're starting to see is in the mining industry, the advent of teachable moments using technology. So if you have a short attention span, it is incumbent upon the employer to recognize that having every 6 months a traditional two-hour refresher isn't necessarily going to work anymore. So this notion of having mobile apps where you can push content to a worker to have a reminder note through a video, a short pop-up, will address that specific issue at a specific time. So we're starting to see a few mining companies that we're working with looking to say, the knowledge retention of our workforce is limited for reasons that have already been mentioned. How can we push and pull data to a worker to ensure that we understand what are the salient messages that we need to communicate at the right time? So you're starting to see an advent of mobile technology enabling to do that. And then the last one focuses on the big data analytics. And I'll conclude with this to be kind of an interesting provocation. And I think one of the earlier talks this morning talked about toolbox talks. What is the method in which the supervisor will determine what is this core health and safety message that needs to be relayed today? What data, what insight are they pulling from to determine this is important today, this is important this week? Well, again, tying into the technology mobility, if you had the option of asking workers, let's say 5 trivia questions over the course of a week, and you aggregate that data at a macro level, you can make a determination based on the responses that a certain percentage of your workforce doesn't get this point. You can gather that real-time data, inform the supervisors, depending on site-specific, wherever they might be, and say, look, our workforce are clearly not answering this question right. Let's modify the toolbox talks to focus on these points. Imagine being able to do that daily, weekly, monthly, and aggregating data. So I'll leave it at that. I had a few more slides, but I know we're tight on time. But there's some really interesting trends that are actually being deployed in other industries that we're starting to see the mining industries think about in terms of innovative new ways to focus on training and development. So I'll leave it at that. If there's questions during the panel, happy to address. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. You should have booked him for 40 minutes, Rick, right now, I'll tell you. Next person I want to introduce you to is Tammy Eger. She's a great person. Oh, she's also, a professor at Lauzier University in Human Kinetics. And this is huge, excuse me. The research chair in occupational health and safety at the Center for Research in Occupational Health, Safety and Health. Tammy.
So So thank you very much for having me, and Fergus, thanks for the introduction. Fergus still hasn't forgiven me for standing him up. I didn't go to dinner once in Winnipeg at a conference, and he doesn't let me forget that. But my dad took preference, so thanks, Fergus. So this is going backwards, go forwards. Okay, if we do a quick look at about some of the trends that are happening in mining, I just took a snapshot of some of the images, and we see things like battery-powered, changing the way diesel is going to be used in terms of our mobile equipment. We see things like digitization of mines. We see working at depth and challenges with heat stress. We see things around mobile equipment and proximity detection. So if we go a little bit deeper, one of the biggest changes that I think is going to have an impact both from productivity but also from the human health is looking at the way mobile equipment is going to be utilized in a mine moving forward. So typically now with diesel, we have problems with diesel particulate matter, you have challenges with vibration exposure, you have challenges with excessive heat production. If we think about mines of the future where we're going to see more battery or electric operated equipment, we're going to be able to have decreases in that diesel particulate matter, certainly decreases in vibration production as well. And what we'll need to do is be able to collect data from the human operators in these areas to see if that will result in decreases in occupational disease. We believe it will, but we're going to need data over a course of time to show that. We still have challenges with mobile equipment. Even when we move to electric or battery powered, these pieces of equipment are really, really large. And we don't have to think very far. Unfortunately, in the north, we've had 2 fatal accidents involving mobile equipment. And so people are still getting struck by. So what's the trend? The trend is moving to proximity detection and collision avoidance. These things are pretty good at detecting. Where we are failing is how we present that information back to the operator. I know the interfaces are getting better, but we still have a lot of work to do. So it's not just simply good enough to have a sound or an alarm or some icon that changes to let an operator know that there's another pedestrian or a potential collision. We have to think about how people process information and how they can take that in to make decisions in order to be able to do a decision that's going to allow them to prevent that collision. Some other trends, and Don talked about it, simulators and training, VR and training. One of the things that CROSH is doing is working with NORCAT to evaluate the impacts of these types of technology on training outcomes. And what's really useful moving forward is we'll be able to model a lot of the what-if scenarios. So if we even take that example of proximity detection, we can design different interfaces in a simulated virtual reality environment and determine how is the operator taking that information in. Are they able to operate and understand what that information is that's telling them and then do an appropriate response? So that's the future in terms of evaluating a lot of our technology as simulation as well. This is one that's, I think, is going to revolutionize. And if I look at it from a human perspective alone, digitization of mining is going to change the way we think about health and safety. And I know people are hesitant, but it's coming regardless. We can put sensors on. We've been monitoring equipment for years, right? You can put sensors on equipment. It's now going to happen with people. One example, CROSH has worked with Equivital at the last International Mine Rescue Competition. The mine rescue workers volunteered to wear these sensors that allowed us to know their heart rate, their breathing rate, their skin temperature, their core temperature. From that, you could predict elements of fatigue, and you could also predict whether they were likely to have a heat stress event in the next 15 minutes if they continued doing what they were doing. This technology is there, and the question is going to be is how do we use it to improve health and safety within the workplace? Other examples, we can use sensors to do exposure. So before, when somebody wanted to know about vibration, they might call CROSH and ask myself or my team to come in. We now have tools. It's your iPhone that you're sitting on is now a vibration measurement device. You can download a free app and you can get a green, yellow, red score that will tell you whether you're at risk for potential injury on a daily basis. You can wear watches that will do the same thing for hand-arm vibration exposure and tell you your likely risk for hand-arm vibration syndrome. These technologies are coming, and they're going to infiltrate mining more and more. Similar for fatigue, there's cameras that can be used that provide information about how likely are you to have a fatigue event. The challenge is, what do we do with this information and where is it going? And I don't know if some people heard this, but sort of scary but fascinating at the same time. There's a company in Sweden where workers have volunteered to put an RFID tag under their skin so they don't have to carry swipe cards around anymore, and they basically swipe their wrist. They get into where they're allowed to go, they pay for their purchases at the cafeteria, they print. So I'm not saying that's where we're going with mining, but think about that possibility with the way technology is. And if you go there, then we need to start having that courageous conversation now. What do we do with the data? Both from a data analytics perspective, we need to make sure we have the tools to analyze it appropriately, but we also need to have a conversation about ownership and who gets that information and who gets it initially. So I think from a personal monitoring perspective, there's value for me as a worker to have information to know whether I'm in a green or a yellow zone in terms of maybe my vibration exposure, my air quality, those sorts of things. But if I'm still exposed for a longer period of time, when I get into the red, does that go to the frontline supervisor? How do you have that conversation? So those are things we need to start having conversations about now, because it's coming, and if we don't, the way in which that data is managed is going to be forced upon us. So something for the future. So with that in mind, I hopefully will engage in a conversation, and I invite everybody in this room, in order to solve how we are going to work with this technology moving forward, we need to involve everyone in the discussion. Workers, manufacturers, technologists, engineers, researchers, our clinical partners as well. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Tammy. Now I'd like to introduce you to Marc Lauzier. Marc is the mines general manager at Goldcorp's Porcupine Gold Mines up in Timmins. He's also the chairman of the Ontario Mining Association and a very effective and active chairman of the association. So I invite Marc up.
Yeah, I borrowed it. So just, Fergus is a really good chairman of these things, right? So he started yesterday, he said, Marc, you got 10 minutes. Then last night he said, Marc, you got 7 minutes. And I just come on stage and he said, Marc, you got 5 minutes, right? So let's just quickly go through this. So let me start with a question for you, if I can get this thing to work. Who would have thought? I was born in the late 60s, so if you do the math, I'm past 40, almost 50. Who would have thought that in 2015, sorry, I'm up by 20 years, I would purchase a car as I moved to Toronto that would have all of these things. Adaptive cruise control, smart enough to tell me that when I hit a flasher, that if somebody's in my blind spot, that I shouldn't change lanes, that if I swerved as I was sort of losing attention, that it would tell me that, hey, Marc, you're not going straight anymore. Who would have thought that we could buy a car like that 30 years ago, 40 years ago? Why am I saying this to you? In fact, just one other thing on that. When I purchased one of those cars, when I get in my company truck now that doesn't have those features, I actually have to remind myself that I don't have those features in the truck that I'm driving, right? Because I'm so used to using those things and they're so reliable, I don't have them when I'm driving my truck, and I have to remind myself of that. So fast forward, mining, who would have thought? When I started mining 30 years ago now, we were using jacklegs, we were using stopers, we were in shrink stopes, because that's all we knew in gold mining, at least in the Timmins camp. We had no long hole stopes. Some stopes I had to walk sideways, because I was too wide. I was one of these big guys, almost weighed 300 pounds, couldn't get in the stope. Now let's look at some of the technology that we've developed and that we're now implementing, and that's available to us in our industry today. If we want to go compressed air free mines, we have new refuge chambers. I'm sure Draeger's going to have one out back. In fact, I purchased one of these for our Borden mine in Chapleau that have come a long way from the first ones that we used that were fiberglass. And when you moved them around the mine, because they were fiberglass, if you hit a wall or if you blasted too close to them, you lost all your compression, you cracked the thing. These things are out of solid steel, and they're a lot tougher than the old ones. Who would have thought that you could actually have stations where you're wearing a mask, you could connect yourself to them, and you could breathe off of them during an emergency, right? That's what this technology affords us. Who would have thought that you could run an open pit fully autonomous? There's 100 trucks, 150 ore trucks that are driving in and out of that pit going to shovels. There's not even an operator cab on this truck, and those trucks work. They're being used. That technology is available to us now. Who would have thought that you could measure pupil dilation when you're starting a vehicle? Some companies are experimenting with this to know whether an operator is tired or impaired, to know that that operator shouldn't be running that gear today and should actually be going home to get some rest to prevent an accident. That technology is there. Who would have thought that I could build a mine with my team in Chapleau that's all battery gear? No diesel gear whatsoever. No NO2, no RCDs, right? All about air quality. What else is available to us, right? Ventilation on demand is now available to us. Personnel and equipment tracking, which, by the way, makes mine rescue's job a lot easier if you know where everybody is and how quickly can you send someone to help someone, right? Continuous air quality monitoring, use of drones to inspect stopes, right? When you have a problem in a stope now, you can send a drone. In fact, when I'm doing the Hollinger pit in Timmins now, I can survey the whole pit with the drone. I don't even need to, I can get a full 3D image, couple inches of accuracy from a drone in the air. Mining simulators, tire pressure monitoring, continuous, so you know what the pressure is on the open pit trucks. Cooling apparel, and even dry stack tailings, just to name a few, right? So lots of technology available to us, and we have to embrace the technology. But what are some of those challenges? What are some of the challenges that we're facing? I'll tell you, for me, it's about the digital revolution and the amount of data that's going to be available to us all at once now, and how we're going to deal with all that data. And if you're following Twitter and you're following YouTube, the issue they're having is they're ending up with gobs and gobs of data, and they don't know where to put it anymore, they don't know how to use it anymore, and it's becoming a real problem. So some of the big companies are working on how do we use this data interactively, how do we organize it, how do we make it work so we can use it real time at all times. And finally, some of the other challenges that we're facing are about people accepting the change, that the technology is sometimes moving too fast. We're not ready for it. We're not ready to train for it. The workforce needs to be trained. We need to remain competitive with other jurisdictions, so we need this technology to remain competitive. And our mines need to be safer and more productive in order for that to happen. So the presentation is about what technology is available today in mining. Thank you.
Thank you, Marc. Great job. Finally, it's my pleasure to introduce Doug Morrison as our cleanup header. Doug actually came from Sudbury. He was 14 years in the mines here in Sudbury before he became a consultant with Golders. Spent 15 years with Golders and then was appointed in 2012 president and CEO of CEMI, the Center for Excellent Mining Innovation. Doug Morrison.
Well, I got the same message, so I cut all the fancy pictures out of my talk altogether and just left bare bones. Oh, wrong button. There we go. So those are the things we do. 6 areas, 4 of them technical, 1 of them is a business piece, because if we don't commercialize the technical developments we make, mining companies can't buy them or lease them or hire the people who know how to use them, and so it doesn't get adopted. So if there's no commercialization, all the fancy technical stuff we do doesn't actually matter at all. We actually have the ultra-deep mining network that focuses on the ultra-deep environment. That's below 2.5 kilometers. A lot of our mines are already there. We have nowhere else to go but deeper than that, and that means hotter and more humid and more difficult. So what do we do when we get down there? 3 of those topics: the rock stress issues, that's the geotechnical piece, which is the health and safety piece we always do, energy consumption, material transportation, and finally the human health piece. So I don't have any sexy pictures on any of those things, those are just the topics we do. But 3 out of the 4 of those are focused on productivity, not health and safety. And I'm just compared to some of the talks I've heard, I get frustrated with disembodying health and safety from the activities we do. I don't get out of bed in the morning not to have an accident. I get out of bed in the morning to do the stuff I have to do and do it safely. I don't get in my car not to have a car accident. I get in my car to go from A to B and also not have an accident. I don't understand why we disconnect health and safety from the stuff we're there to do. We can make mines really, really safe by closing them because they're not sufficiently productive to be profitable. Safe mines are closed. We have to make them as safe as possible, but they have to be productive, because if they don't make a product, if they don't make a profit, they will close. So we sit in this space here trying to take the technical results from research and move it into the marketplace, because if it doesn't get to the marketplace, nobody can buy it. Research gives you new knowledge, but innovation gives you new business. If there's not new businesses being created to do new things in our business, we won't have a business, because it's not going to stay the same way. It has to change. We don't have to bring in new technology to reduce the number of people we have working in the mines. Most of the people we work with today will be gone in 5 years. And almost all of them will certainly be gone in 10 years, so there'll be hardly anybody working in our operations. That's why we need this new fancy technology to replace the people that are already with us right now. So for me, there's the graph. We work on projects that try to reduce the upfront capital cost, accelerate the time at which we make first production or first revenue, and change the rate of return on the mining methods we do. If we don't improve the productivity of our mines with innovation, we won't have mines. And that's not just the underground productivity piece, it's also the work we do on tailings and waste management. One of the fundamental things about things like scoop trams is a scoop tram weighs 3 times more than the ore that it carries. It comes back empty. That means for every ton we move from A to B with a scoop, we move 6 tons of machine. So 80% of the diesel we burn every day is to move the machine, and 20% is to move the ore. You need to decide if you're in the machine moving business or the ore moving business. Because at 8,000 feet below surface, you better be in the ore moving business and shift away from the machine moving business. That means fundamentally changing the way the business operates, not just buying a bigger scoop or even a battery scoop. Batteries weigh more than diesel. So if you add more batteries to get the thing to work as a battery, the weight of the total machine is getting bigger and bigger, and the weight of the ore you carry is getting smaller and smaller. What is the business you're in? Are you in the business of moving ore, or moving machines, or machines plus batteries? That ratio has to go the other way. The equipment we use has to get simpler and easier and smaller and lighter, and we need to focus on moving ore, not machines. And the reason for that is, if I can see the diagram, we always talk about making those changes and improving safety at the same time. People talk about innovation as if it's high risk. In actual fact, every single day our mines get deeper and hotter and less productive. So, if you want to look at it this way, I keep pressing this button, nothing happens. There you go. Innovation, step change, big changes, double or triple the performance, double or triple the advance rates or the production rate, or half the cost of ventilation, etc. No innovation does not mean no risk. Our costs are getting worse every single day, so not making any changes to the process means you're slowly losing money every single day if the process stays exactly the same. So that's why innovation is important. It's the only way to keep ourselves alive and productive, and we need to change the way we think and not disconnect health and safety from productivity, because that's what we do every day. It's not just about being safe, which we all agree on, but it's connecting, and I have the same car as Marc, and I switch all that shit off. Because if it breaks down, I won't realize that I've drifted into the wrong lane. If I have all that equipment switched off, I'm actually present in the car, focusing on what I'm supposed to be doing, rather than all the things I would rather do when I should be focusing on my lane changes. So that's a bunch of stuff. Happy to have your questions when we get to it. Thank you.
Great. Okay, great.
As always, very stimulating, Doug, and challenging. We have time for a few questions. Right up front here, Bob Barkey, please.
Thanks. Great presentations. I have a question, not for any particular panel member. Do you think there's a gap between the way that innovation occurs in the mining industry compared to other industries? And if so, how do you explain that?
I don't know that it's much different. Lots of places are resistant to change. We might be slightly more resistant than other places, but I think we actually should be more motivated to change than the other places. And the reason for that is most businesses have the same inputs happening all the time, the same products coming in, the same widgets being made. In our case, we are depleting a finite resource every single day, and eventually it will all be gone. And it's getting cheaper and more expensive and harder to work all the time. So our cost profile is increasing as we go. The only way for us to do that is to adopt innovation. The problem is not the creation of innovation, it's the adoption of innovation. So anybody who has a CEO who does not have a budget for change management has no interest in innovation. So don't go and talk to them about it because they're not going to introduce it anyway. It's not a question of not having innovation, it's not adopting innovation is the fundamental problem.
I have a question. Both Don and Tammy talked about e-learning or simulators. And as an old bugger like me, I always ask the question is just what is the retention? Have there been enough studies done about retention and e-learning and particularly the use of simulators? One of you want to grab that?
So I'll answer that two ways. Fergus, probably you're not necessarily the target market initially, so that's one.
I love you too, Tammy.
Yeah. But secondly, that is some of the research that we're doing with NORCAT, and we are showing that absolutely simulation training is a very good first start. It doesn't mean that you're not still going to have some time as the hands-on with the equipment, but the amount of time that you need hands-on can be reduced because you're now in a place where you're better able to learn from that hands-on. In the simulator, you can take away some of that intrepidation, maybe some of the fear, and our young people that we need to attract to mining are very comfortable in simulators. I mean, they live in a VR and in an AI world, and so we need to be able to train those individuals in a way that they will understand. But there's that mix. There's a combination that's going on, and I don't know, Don, if you want to add too.
The only thing that I'll highlight on simulation, and quite proudly, NORCAT is one of the world's largest equipment simulation centers now in the world, which is quite exciting here in Sudbury. One of the biggest things that our customers ask us who take equipment simulation training is, how do we know it actually works in the field? What data elements can you use to validate that we're paying you for a service to ensure that our workers are more productive and safe in the environment? And on the theme of innovation and what's next, many of the companies that actually manufacture the equipment simulation technology are now looking at opportunities to take sensors, put them on the actual piece of equipment that are linked to the individual operator to do longitudinal analysis to validate that after their kind of the before and after shot, you can actually measure metrics on the vehicle for said operator and try to do correlation analysis to say, because this individual has taken simulation training, yes, there's other competing variables, but we can actually measure the performance of said worker on said piece of equipment and actually do that analysis back and forth to determine, is simulation training actually working in the field? So stay tuned, it's happening in other industries. The only other comment I'll have just to the question here, related to innovation in terms of the mining industry, it's really interesting. If you look at trends in other industries, I think the mining industry is closely following the pharma industry, where historically a lot of the in-house innovation and R&D work was done in-house. But over the last 20, 30 years, there's been a pretty significant divestiture of in-house capacity to develop, where now the mining companies are becoming net buyers of innovation versus builders of innovation. I love that model. So what you're seeing bubbling up is a huge amount of tech companies, big and small alike, still having to solve problems in the global mining industry, but it's an outsourced innovation model which drives creativity, uniqueness, competition. It's a model that has worked very well in pharma that the mining industry is now adopting. I absolutely agree with Doug's point. The challenge now becomes one of adoption and de-risking. And we're seeing some amazing new models coming up in terms of how do you actually sell to mining companies from both big and small companies alike. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Don. And to me, that's what innovation is all about. Perhaps one more question, because I hear some bellies rumbling over here.
Yeah, so I have a question for Marc. So it's really great that Borden is looking at the mine of the future with the innovation of all electric. And my question regarding, is, putting electric in the mines take out a hazard for human health, but introduces other hazards. So how are you managing the potential of that?
Oh, that's a very good point. Can you hear me? Yeah. So it's a very good point, and the way you manage that is through a proper risk assessments, right? And just making sure that you identify all the risks, measure the risks, and put in policies and procedures, no different than you would have with the traditional technology, to make sure that you're addressing the risks, the new risks that you're associating. One example I can think of is electric gear makes a lot less noise than diesel gear, right? So if you're running electric gear in a ramp, and you're coming up to a crew, they may not hear the machine come because, so you got to think about, am I going to alarm that machine? Am I going to add lights to that machine? What am I going to do so people know that machine's coming? So yes, you need to proper risk assessments, and you need to put in the proper controls to ensure that you're addressing the new risks that you're adding to the workforce.
Which mining review? Absolutely. So that's the Innovators Panel, ladies and gentlemen. I think you've heard some interesting discussions and perhaps some challenges to us all about introducing an innovation. I want to thank the panelists for participating. I put the bum's rush on them, but we ran out of time. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And that's it.